confirmation hearings abound. Last couple days with Senator Jeff Sessions, Trump's pick for Attorney General. Yesterday, the beginning of the confirmation hearing of Rexon, as I have termed him and popularized him. Rex Tillerson, Trump's choice for Secretary of State, now underway, is the confirmation hearing for General James Mad Dog Mattis, Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. And I'm hoping that General Mattis makes his opening statement, one of his rather infamous quotes. I come in peace. I didn't bring artillery, but I'm pleading with you with tears in my eyes. If you frack with me, I'll kill you all. I think that would be set a nice tone for the confirmation hearings for Mattis. Tillerson was a little bit more understated, but he did have prepared remarks yesterday on two important geopolitical adversaries, Russia and China. On Russia, Rexon said this.
Russia today poses a danger, but it is not unpredictable in advancing its own interest. It has invaded the Ukraine, including the taking of Crimea, and supported Syrian forces that brutally violates the laws of war. Our NATO allies are right to be alarmed at a resurgent Russia. But it was in the absence of American leadership that this door was left open and unintended signals were sent. We backtracked on commitments we made to allies. We sent weak or mixed signals with red lines that turned into green lights.
And that's a clear and direct statement about Putin and about Russia and, frankly, about U.S. policy with respect to both. On China, Rexon said this.
We should also acknowledge the realities about China. China's island building in the South China Sea is an illegal taking of disputed areas without regard for international norms. China's economic and trade practices have not always followed its commitments to global agreements. It steals our intellectual property and is aggressive and expansionist in the digital realm.
Fairly clear statements on both. Not, kind of soft corporate speak you might expect from a Fortune 100 CEO. But that doesn't mean there aren't questions about Tillerson and some areas which will still be traversed prior to his confirmation. And for more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Robert Charles. He is a former Assistant Secretary of State during the George W. Bush presidency, now the president of the Charles Group. Robert Charles, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So what was your assessment of Tillerson's performance in an arena that is, admittedly fairly new to him, and his statements?
He's never served public office. It's got to be new to him.
He's been involved in geopolitical matters, as the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world. So the dealing with these senators is not exactly new to him. But making policy statements with respect to U.S. policy is. And I want to get your assessment on his performance and what he had to say about Russia and China in particular.
Yeah, I was pleasantly pleased. I didn't quite know what to expect. It's interesting. I wake up every morning and think to myself, it's morning in America. We have real leaders in these nomination seats. I can't wait to see Mattis today. Tillerson surprised me in a very positive way. It's funny you call him Rexon. I've heard him called T-Rex by others. He's a force. He's a personality, and he's thoughtful. The overwhelming impression I have is that he was being judicious. He was being careful, which is probably what you should be in that role. Just like a lawyer not prejudging a case, he was waiting to see classified information before he made demonstrable statements that they would, could again, set off a diplomatic flurry. What he said in the opening statement, what you played as a clip, was absolutely right. He seems to understand not just his role, not just this moment in time, but also history, and that is extremely important for a Secretary of State. I have said before, he reminds me, it sort of seems an amalgam of several different secretaries. There's a little bit of George Shultz in him. He's obviously business savvy. He ran the third largest corporation in the world. You don't get there by accident. You know who your friends and enemies really are. You know how to talk with both. You know what tone to use with both. You obviously know how to make decisions and get to outcomes. And that, frankly, is one of the missing pieces at the State Department. It's an unwieldy department which tends to think that multi-year missions means you don't really have to measure anything in any given month or year, and that's really not true. I think what's going to happen when he gets there, I think he will be confirmed, is that he's going to take a long, hard look at all of these issues. He's going to look for incremental diplomatic tools. He's probably going to work very closely with both Generals Mattis and Kelly, not to mention the Attorney General, who does play overseas in some significant ways. And my overall impression is I couldn't be happier. I wake up in the morning and I think, but my God, thank God, it's morning in America. We have real leaders. He is clearly on top of these issues. His character, if anything, I was disappointed in the questioners, including a couple of Republicans. I understand that confirmation hearings are about grandstanding and being heard rather than actually getting an answer from a witness. But, a 4-minute question followed by a 10-second or 30 seconds for an answer it says something to you about the way the Senate sees itself. They have a role. Their role is to guide this nominee. The notion that that people would, and then this happened in the Sessions hearing as well, that they would take shots at his understanding of facts or at his character or interrupt him, when he's trying to provide the exact kinds of answers that if I were in their role, I'd want to hear. I think the average American wants to hear what he thinks about these issues. I think he was.
Yeah, but don't you think there's cause for pause? I mean, considering his close relationship in the past with Russia, and he wouldn't describe Putin as a war criminal. Did you see that as I gotcha question?
I think that, no, not at all. I think that was exactly the right answer. And why? Because you really don't want your Secretary of State, in his first public statements without going. I mean, that is a legal determination. It's the kind of thing you would want a room full of lawyers and a room full of policy people and maybe an historian or two like James Billington to give you some guidance here. You don't just on a snap of a senator's question start labeling people around the world. And there were, I don't want to get too deep into it, but there were factual inaccuracies in some of what Senator Rubio said, and I don't disagree with the gravamen of what he said. What he said was accurate in its intent, but there are times and places for that kind of thing. I think that was more about allowing him to be heard on his views than it was about eliciting. Obviously, if he had elicited a concrete answer, I guess he would have felt they'd reached victory. But, my feeling is I want the Secretary of State of the United States to be among the most circumspect leaders, to be thoughtful in the spirit not only of George Shultz or John Foster Dulles, but of James Baker and Colin Powell. I want them to be able to think hard about these issues, come to sensible, clearly defendable, widely subscribed views, and then, if it's important, put it on the table for the international community. We have dealt over the last, frankly, for the history of the country. Go back to the very beginning. We have dealt with lots of countries that have failures, and I would. The only other thing that occurred to me out of the discussion in Russia is that how quickly we forget. Ronald Reagan made it very clear that the American people have common purpose with the Russian people, that the love of freedom is timeless, that we should be thinking about them as much as we should be thinking about their government.
No.
I didn't hear a single senator talk about the freedoms that are being, in effect denied to the average Russian. And I would say that's where your priority ought to be.
That's a fair point. Now, also Tillerson, he has some separation from Trump, certainly. Some of that was on display yesterday on some of these issues, whether it's respect to nuclear proliferation to Japan and South Korea. Again, like Sessions in opposition on a ban on Muslim immigration, which Trump has walked away from long ago.
Right.
But the press corps won't let him do that. But on the issue of climate change and what to do about it, although he suggests the evidence is inconclusive, he has previously and I guess still embraces the idea of carbon taxes. Now, that's more of a domestic policy or a kind of a crossover policy, but I don't, I've got qualms about that.
Yeah. I find it, I'm always interested in the vast universe of things that people could say in answer to a question and then what they actually end up saying. And I think he's an incredibly honest person. He's I happen to personally think it means something that he was an Eagle Scout, a distinguished Eagle Scout, that Tillerson, like Sessions, have really a record of integrity their entire lives. But what he chose, in a way, not to say, that I think he could have said, is that Exxon actually has a remarkable record for not just its fossil fuel, being a well-managed fossil fuel production company, but but actually has been quite creative. In fact, has been pushing the envelope on a lot of alternative fuels. And if I'm not an Exxon guy, I've never met Tillerson. I've never, I have no dog in the fight. But if you go and look at their site, it's remarkable how forward-leaning they are in alternative energies, as are some of the other companies. So I think he could have gone that route. I think he's trying to stay very much on a straight line in terms of the answers he gives. I hesitate to even get into the climate change issue, but the bottom line is climate, weather, and long-term weather patterns have changed remarkably and typically have confounded predictions for as long as recorded history has put them on paper or parchment. I don't know what we put them on before. But bottom line is there are changes afoot, and
right.
I think it's not going to be a priority. I cannot imagine it being a priority for him. I think he's going to give a nod to the fact that the international community has treated it as such. But, the United States is an incredibly powerful country by reputation, even when we have a weak leader like we did with President Obama.
Well, and plus, as we heard in Obama's farewell address, he's already saved the planet. So what's there to worry about?
Yeah, there you go. So we invented the internet and saved the planet, so we should be done.
There you go.
I will tell you that last piece there, the idea that we're a powerful country is important, because if we stepped out on the world stage and said that saving cats was the number one thing in the world, by God, there'd be a bunch of countries that lined up behind us. And instead, John Kerry went out and kind of diminished the major national security threats while elevating that global climate change idea. And, of course, countries lined up behind us. So
and you
it's
think,
not surprising.
Just the final question, you think Tillerson gets confirmed?
Absolutely.
He is Robert Charles, former Assistant Secretary of State under the George W. Bush administration, now the president of the Charles Group. Robert Charles, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.